It seems like it goes with the American tradition.
Yeah.
Historically, Americans fled from repressive governments that didn't allow us to, live according to our own beliefs.
Conditions differ from state to state. I used to live in New Mexico, which was right on the Mexican border, and so they had different concerns about drugs, as you might imagine, than they would in Kentucky or Indiana, so far from the border. So situations differ, and our states are so diverse. Why not let them try to address nobody's got a real good handle on the drug problems of our country. So why not encourage different approaches and try to experiment and see which ones work best?
Right. It's that's the big in fact that's one of the big questions is why not? Why is there this incredible paranoia having to do with a substance which is scientifically been proven to be one of the least toxic of all medications or drugs in the whole pharmacopoeia?
Well, if you're talking about marijuana specifically.
Specifically about marijuana.
Yeah. A lot of people see it as really the linchpin of the war on drugs. There were almost 700,000 arrests for marijuana last year. And a significant proportion of those, I can't remember the exact figure, were for simple possession. So I think some critics feel that the federal authorities feel they can't loosen up at all on marijuana, even marijuana as medicine, because the whole thing might come tumbling down. When you're talking about hardcore heroin users in this country, the figures are, I don't know, in the hundreds of thousands, whereas with marijuana there's obviously millions and millions of users. If you count people who've used it once over their lifetime, what are the estimates, 65 million or something. So I think they're afraid that if they lighten up a little bit on any aspect of their drug policy, the whole thing might come tumbling down. And I think that's why they're so fearful about acknowledging that there's medical benefit to marijuana, because if they acknowledge that there's anything redeeming about this substance at all, then, so they say, that they think the whole belief system will crumble. Kids will immediately think, well, it's fine for me too, and it's...
Right. And that's one of the big problems with marijuana, I think, is, or one of the big concerns is children, being involved with it in a negative way. And I want to get back to what you were just saying, though, the concept that if there was anything redeeming about it whatsoever, that it could be threatening to, I don't know what, some kind of mindset that I thought went out with Hitler.
Well, as I said to you, my training is in public health. And so, what I would like to see ideally would be a system where we regulate each substance, including alcohol and tobacco, according to how harmful it is. And instead, if you look at the history of drug laws in this country, it's all based on politics. It's been based on politics from day one. And I hate to say it, but it's racist in its origins as well. And if you look at when marijuana was first made illegal, when cocaine was first made illegal, and the very first anti-drug laws were anti-opium laws, and they were directed at the Chinese railroad workers in California. And when you look at the records from those times, that was the motivation for doing it. It wasn't that any of these substances were so terribly dangerous. It was that they were seen as being used by a minority group that the majority felt threatened by, and that this was a way to clamp down. So it's not a really wonderful heritage. And all we're saying is we'd like to see each drug evaluated in terms of where it fits on the spectrum of harmfulness. Most of us health types would agree that alcohol is probably the worst, is undoubtedly the worst, in terms of how much harm it does in accidents and cirrhosis and a whole
association with violence,
yes,
family
exactly.
problems.
Right. But yet that's not how we regulate things. It's seemingly arbitrary. Alcohol is illegal, is legal, marijuana isn't, and yet it has no relationship to their real potential for harm.
Right, and taking it a step further, I was reading a book by Lester Grinspoon, the Harvard psychiatrist, who's written extensively about many different things, marijuana in one. He wrote a book called Marijuana Reconsidered. And he's also published some articles in which he states that he thinks marijuana may not only not be a negative medication, but that it might be one of the wonder drugs, one of the, maybe the top 3 medications of the 20th century.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that's amazing about it, I've read some of his books too. The one I read was Marijuana, the Forbidden Medicine, which he updated, I believe, in '98. And he talks about, there's many recognized uses for it. In this Institute of Medicine report, they say the most widely recognized, acknowledged uses are for nausea from chemotherapy, for AIDS wasting syndrome to restore appetite and reduce nausea, and for multiple sclerosis to reduce spasms and chronic pain. And I just lost my train of thought. But
well,
okay. So there are many uses that are widely recognized. But then there's new research coming along all the time, showing that it's useful for other things. For example, I just read about its usefulness for Tourette's syndrome, which is, you could probably explain it better than me, but it's a kind of a tics.
Right.
It's a nervous system disorder, right?
Right.
So, and he's saying that it's useful for these. There's anecdotal evidence that it's useful for all of these other conditions, but it hasn't been rigorously tested.
It hasn't been studied because there's been a blackout.
Yes.
Since Nixon, basically, on any objective study of possible benevolent or beneficial effects of marijuana.
In fact, there's a researcher named Donald Abrams who's at San Francisco General Hospital, and he's the first researcher that's gotten permission to do studies about potential beneficial effects. He's studying its use for AIDS wasting syndrome. And he calls it the catch-22 of research politics. Because on the one hand, they're saying, well, there aren't any controlled studies that show that it's beneficial. And on the other hand, the federal government, has been blocking such studies for over 20 years.
Right.
So it's really a frustrating situation.
Yeah. I can remember when I was doing my psychiatry residency at the University of Kentucky in Lexington, probably about 1976, something like that. We brought in a patient who had been using marijuana, smoking maybe 4 or 5 marijuana cigarettes a day for something like 15 years, and his wife wanted him to stop taking it, and they brought him in just to observe what withdrawal he might go through. I was working in a chemical withdrawal unit for alcoholics and heroin and narcotics and so forth. And anyway, I remember very well, we brought this fellow in, and he had his last marijuana cigarette before he came in the hospital, and he and his wife and family all reported he'd been a heavy smoker for years and years. And to make a long story short, he had no withdrawal symptoms whatsoever. I mean, it was just maybe a little feeling of uncomfortableness, but I think that all of us at that time knew that it was questionable about the scare tactics in terms of whatever the negative effects of marijuana.
Well, see, that's why we believe that current educational efforts among our kids aren't working, because they've been, first of all, very black and white and giving a strictly no-use message. And they have misrepresented what the effects are. They paint marijuana specifically as, this dire substance, and they tell the kids that it's addictive and that, their grades are going to go down the tubes, and yet they see their friends who use it. They observe for themselves that these terrible things aren't happening, and that undercuts these educational efforts. I mean, we believe it's far better to tell kids the truth, which would be something like, well, no, it's not ideal, and smoking anything is not a very good idea, and especially when you're young, and so forth and so on. But to keep it within the realm of reality, yes, it makes you disoriented. You certainly shouldn't drive when you're on it, but not it'll make it so you never have children, or you're going to go crazy, or you'll become addicted, you know. It's not true, and kids understand that it's not true, and it's just